Today's video has been sponsored by our partners at the SOJOURN, the award-winning audio drama that has just released its third volume. You can find it on Google Books, Apple Books or iTunes, and many others, as well as through the Patreon linked below, which is an especially good deal as you can get every single episode just for pledging at the lowest tier. The higher tiers have bonus content such as the visual dictionary and anthology shorts. If you don't know what the SOJOURN is, you can visit their YouTube channel for free samples and extra lore content like ship breakdowns. The SOJOURN Volume 3, out now. Hey everybody, I'm Hujuana and this is Spacedock, where today I am going to talk about some of my favourite superweapons in sci-fi, vaguely continuing the theme from the nukes in space video. If you haven't watched that one, by the way, go do it, it's pretty good and I'm not biased at all. In this video though, I'm not going to be ranking them as they're all just so varied and it's hard to compare them against one another. That applies in general to superweapons, as they can range from planet killers to just very powerful elements of a battle force, fulfilling different roles but still worthy, in my opinion, of being deemed super. For example, Doom's BFG, or this thing from the Interstellar Imperium mod for Star Sector. Wait, what's it doing? Why is it...
Sweet Jesus!
We're going to kick things off with what is probably the most well-known super of all, the original Death Star. Now, there are a lot of superweapons in Star Wars fitting every possible definition of the word, but in my opinion, the superlaser remains the best, and I'm sure the Star Wars fans in the audience can guess what the worst one is. The superlaser though, or the concave dish composite beam superlaser to give it its full name, has always been a classic. It's got that key element of having a drawn-out firing sequence that builds tension and can be used to such great effect in the story. Sure, there's the distinctive combining energy beams as part of it, but it's mostly about the guys in funny helmets pulling levers alongside some amazing sound design. While talking about combining beams, the Species 8472 ships in Star Trek that did the same thing are a neat twist on the formula, and I'm sure there's many other examples of this happening out there. But back to the Death Star, and the second one has a bit of a problem in that the weapon feels a bit neutered by only one-shotting entire spaceships rather than planets, making it feel far less special. When you have a weapon like that, you need to make its firing an event, something memorable. Luckily, Rogue One managed to achieve that even though the superlaser was being fired at low power levels. A similar plot device superweapon that is just brilliant is the EMP satellite from GoldenEye. Rather than a firing sequence, there's instead a whole process for authorization to fire the weapon with handprints and keycards and all sorts of things. Then there's yet another step involving the key and firing crystal that the first step unlocked, finishing out with a glorious synchronized key turn. After all that, now the weapon can be aimed and fired, but there's yet more steps after that. I love this elaborate build-up, it's just so great, and like the Death Star, it pays off later in the film's climax. And the effect of the weapon itself, it's fairly unique and isn't just yet another big laser beam or explosion. Another superweapon that feels like an event is the Giga Wave Cannon from R-Type Final. If you've not played any of the R-Type games, every ship has three styles of weapon. The standard pew-pew auto-fire type of thing, the force device which can block enemy shots and be detached, and a powerful charged up wave cannon for dealing with bigger targets. What each ship does can vary a lot, and R-Type Final had 101 ships with a huge variety of weapon combinations across them all. The weapon I'm talking about though is normally only found on one ship, the R902 Ragnarok II, and it charges up 7 times and can completely clear the screen, and can even obliterate bosses. There is a more powerful version of that weapon though that any ship can use, but only against one of the final bosses of the game. When you charge this final wave cannon, the UI on the charge bar actually breaks from the sheer power of the thing before you fire it, and it seems like your ship is disabled afterwards. And I can't talk about wave cannons without mentioning the Yamato. I would just be eviscerated in the comments if I didn't mention that. But I've never watched any of SBY, so consider this a peace offering instead. Speaking of comments, let me know what other rankings or top 5s or whatevers that you want us to cover. And while you're at it, please like and subscribe. You know you want to. If you don't want to, then well, I'm going to have to blow you up with another of my favourite superweapons, the cross-phased supermassive neutrino burst. I mean, the Halo rings. Yeah, Halo lore can be a bit dense at times, but I can't help but love the rings themselves, and the whole conservation measure as well. Saving the galaxy by wiping out all life in it, including yourself, because your enemy is essentially unstoppable, is just a brilliant premise underpinning the franchise. As with the previous weapons, the rings do also have a firing sequence that once again becomes a key part of the story. And now we're going to do a hard lurch to something our editor can't provide footage for because they're from a book. The cache weapons carried aboard Nostalgia for Infinity in Revelation Space. I'm going to keep this brief, but I adore this universe and the mysterious and varied cache weapons are great. Moving swiftly on to something that does have footage, the death cloud used by the Shadows in Babylon 5. Well, sort of. A lot of the footage is of Walter White before he time travelled and settled down in Middle America, but there's some. The way it's described as working is fairly horrifying, completely enveloping its target in a huge nanotech lattice before launching thousands of nuclear warheads into the crust of the target planet, wiping it clean. It's also capable of enveloping fleets and draining power from anything within it. It's far more interesting than the equivalent the Vorlons deploy, and it relies on regular old nuclear weapons for its dirty work, though it does use staggering numbers of them. Another thing with staggering numbers is the amount of units you can build in Supreme Commander. Alongside these numbers, one of this series' defining features is the experimental units that each faction can deploy, and these are another flavour of superweapon. The best of these in my opinion is the legendary Monkey Lord, which is a really bizarre name for an amphibious insectoid robot with a giant microwave laser. The more appropriately named Fat Boy that the UEF can deploy is also really neat, a mobile mini-base in its own right with battleship tier firepower. I also have to shout out the Aeon Tsar for being more destructive when its shattered hulk falls on top of stuff than when its weapon is firing. Another game that fits the special unit definition of superweapon is Sins of the Solar Empire, specifically the 6 Titans from the Rebellion expansion. The game does also have regular superweapons with their unique faction effects as well, but I'm talking about cool spaceships on the Spaceship YouTube channel. The TEC have a highly versatile tank and support Titan, with their other option being a big gun with an engine. They're powerful but pretty standard options, I think you'll agree. The Titans of the other 2 factions are far more interesting. The Advent have the Coronata, which looks somewhat like a person swaddled into a cocoon and has the power to transfer control of enemy ships to your side using psionic powers. It can even use these powers to take over an entire planet. Their second Titan is all about dealing damage with abilities and is appropriately called the Eradica. The final faction, the Vasari, have a spiky tanky thing that uses vampiric nanobots to restore its own health, as well as the Vorastra, which is just gorgeous looking. Remember in the Star Destroyer video how highly I rated the Super Duper class from The Last Jedi? Well, this is that, except it can do a mini FTL jump, set up an FTL gate for reinforcements, and can eat enemy ships. And now we reach Stargate. Like with Star Wars, there's a ton of superweapons across the many seasons of the 3 shows, from the Ori Plague used to force entire civilizations to capitulate, to Anubis' Infinity Stone-powered Death Star. It's got an invincible super ship, an unstoppable laser beam, and a device that can wipe out all life, among many others. But my 2 favourite ones are both related to the Stargates themselves. The first is one of Anubis' ancient toys from the SG-1 Season 6 opening 2-parter that overloaded a gate's power storage and caused it to explode. This thing is just great because it takes everything known about the gates and Earth's otherwise impregnable iris defense system and exploits it all in a way that feels completely legitimate, and the solution being to just chuck the thing through hyperspace is amazing, building on things all the way back to Season 1. The best one though is more of an improvised superweapon than anything else on this list, and once again combines events from previous seasons together to cause one of the most destructive events the franchise ever saw. It's that one time Carter blew up a star. I know I said this isn't really a top 5 or ranking video, but I have to finish on what is very possibly my favourite superweapon. It's the city-destroying energy weapon on the City Destroyer ships from Independence Day, which were used by the alien invaders to destroy cities. I absolutely love these ships, with their simple geometric design that isn't messy but still has detail when seen close up, and the main weapon itself is just gorgeous looking. It ticks all the boxes to be an iconic weapon. It's got a full firing sequence with multiple steps that the audience can follow along with, and it's got a crazy physics-defying wave of destructive fire. It's just brilliantly paced as a story device. There's just the right amount of build-up to it unleashing total devastation that it can be turned back on the invaders in the climax of the film. The City Destroyers were so distinctive that Futurama even poked fun at them with the anti-monument laser that the Omicronians used when they invaded Earth. They even miniaturized it. Unfortunately, the weapon got completely neutered in a film sequel, as they were turned into something far less impressive. They kind of retain a much shortened firing sequence, but in general they're treated as just generic powerful weapons and were overshadowed by the completely bonkers gravity stuff that film had going on. So, dear viewers, what are some of your favourite superweapons? Does anyone actually like the Sun Crusher? I'd love to see what everyone thinks, so hit up those comments to let me know. Beyond that, if you want to financially support the channel and the creation of videos like this, you can join our Patreon to potentially have your name featured at the end of videos, as well as becoming a YouTube channel member or by using Super Thanks. Speaking of thanks, thank you so much for watching and supporting us, and I'll see you next time.